Hello, thank you very much for having me. Yes, my name's Ellie, and I'm a doctoral researcher at the Museum of Natural History in Oxford and also the University of Warwick, and my work is on visitor experience and evaluation. So I'm going to be talking you today through 3 different exhibits at the museum and how they engage visitors in the climate crisis in very different ways, and give you some food for thought about how you want to do that with your collections. So, so as I said, I'm a researcher and I evaluate museum exhibits. So essentially, I just hand out surveys to people and then do some data on it at the end. But essentially, my evaluation focus is all about looking at perception of an exhibit or an exhibition from the visitor perspective. So it's all about them building a picture of what they're seeing, how they're perceiving it, and what those outcomes are. It's very quantitative based. And so it gives you some nice statistical evidence for the mechanisms of visitor experience and really understanding that impact. So I feel, and my supervisors feel, that it's quite a good method for kind of evaluation. So today I'm going to be talking through how it works. But yeah, the first thing is essentially, how do we know that this method works, and how do you know that I'm just not kind of making up what I'm going to say to you? So this bit of framework here is a bit of it's a very small framework about how kind of visitor experience and engagement with exhibits works, which is something that I've developed as part of my research. But essentially, if you kind of start in the top row, you have from the museum perspective. So we have our exhibit features. So there are specimens, there are text, there are interpretation, our design, all the things that come together into the exhibit. This then forms these ideas of an exhibition character, and this is all about the qualities of an exhibit that we talk about as kind of museum professionals. So we want to say it's engaging and interesting and purposeful and well organised and stimulating, so all things like that. This then for the museum forms those key aims of what we want people to get out of those exhibits. From the visitor perspective, everything is pretty much the same, but where the qualities are in the middle, it's an apparent character. So it's essentially what the visitor is perceiving, and that might not be what the museum has intended. And that is because it's mediated by the kind of bit in the middle, those affecting factors, which are things like a person's gender or their motivation for visiting or how engaged they are or their education level. And this kind of impacts how they perceive that exhibit. And then this goes on to produce those actual visitor gains again. So what we want visitors to know, what they feel about the exhibit, and what they might do after it. So all of the evaluation data and things I'm going to talk about forms on this framework. And the evaluation methods we use are essentially 2 types of survey. So we collect some visitor information just about their gender, their age group, how often they come to visit. We then asked them how the exhibition made them feel. So that was on a standard kind of list of 20 different emotions. And then we also asked them to rate that on those qualities I talked about earlier, using this thing called semantic differential scales, which is a posh way to say they're made up of 2 opposing words with 7 points in the middle. So if you feel something's really confusing, you tick towards confusing. If you feel like it's really clear, tick towards clear. We then have some statements on visitor outcomes. So things like how people feel they've learned something, or they've enjoyed it, or they want to learn more about it, etc. Then about 10 to 20% of people who take part in this have some comment boxes, so they add in some comments about what they like about the exhibit, etc. And then they just have a quick chat with me afterwards, and we just really kind of unpick that. So that's the evaluation methods that all of this data and these results that I'm going to talk about today is based on. So the first kind of method that we've used, I've kind of called empowerment through knowledge. And this is a little case study of the Meet the Future exhibition, which was a temporary exhibition, which discussed the latest research on environmental and health impacts of meat consumption. So when we talked about what visitors liked, a lot of things that they said is the pictures that are here on the right-hand side. And this is all the kind of visual statistics and the graphs that were presented and the data that was presented in the exhibition. And one of the most things was the kind of bottom left corner picture, which is a graph of meat consumption of different countries, which changed over 40 years. And the graph was made up of burger stacks. So it's a really like visual representation of that data. And I've peppered the statement with a couple of quotes, so you can have a read of those in your own time. But that's what visitors liked about this exhibition. This made them feel, kind of alternately, quite a range of negative emotions. So quite a lot of things like sadness and guilt, but there were a few positives in there as well, but mainly there was kind of negative emotions. People rated the exhibition as relevant, as accessible, which is really good, as relatable and impactful. So you can really see that that data made them feel like it was really relevant to their own daily lives, as everyone has a diet and it matters. We also found that female visitors rated the exhibition a lot more positively than males. I don't quite know why that is, but that was a really interesting trend that we found for visitors. And then the outcomes of that was that people had a really strong sense of understanding and learning, but that their level of enjoyment was slightly less. And that might be kind of natural for such a sensitive topic as kind of meat consumption and animal ethics and things. We also found that visitors who said they felt guilty statistically were more likely to also say that they wanted to change their behaviour after visiting, which is a really kind of meaningful bit of results for this kind of evaluation. So that's the first one. The second one is all about the kind of emotional heartstrings, and this is very much more collections based. But this is all about the Future in Our Hands exhibit, which is one of the new permanent exhibits at the Museum of Natural History, which was part of our redisplay programme in 2022. So the Future in Our Hands highlights various extinct and endangered species and our role in protecting them. And I'm not sure how well you can see, but all the specimens are held in kind of cast hands, which were all cast from people who are involved in conservation. So it was really like beautiful, amazing kind of story behind the exhibit. But what did visitors like about this? They really liked the specimens and the range of specimens that we included. It wasn't just the cute hedgehogs, but various other things as well. They also really liked the dodo. Obviously, it's our most famous specimen at the museum, so that was a big draw for people. But they also felt that the hands really conveyed that idea of environmental responsibility, and that was a really strong kind of message for people. This then made people feel a really wide range of emotions, both negative and positive. So things like guilt and compassion, but also admiration for the natural world, etc. And people felt the exhibit was really purposeful and had that really strong message. It was relevant, it was stimulating, and it was really enriching for people. And also people, again, they felt that real strong draw to the message of environmental responsibility. So that's how they kind of perceived that exhibit. And then the outcomes of this is that, again, there was that really strong sense of understanding, but alternatively to Meet the Future, there was a real sense of enjoyment and a sense that the visit was a real good use of their time, so that sense of worth and it being worthwhile. There was some desire to change behaviour, but it was a less specific action to take. People were kind of a bit more unsure about what they said they would want to do. It was more about reading up on natural history and being more conscious of their environmental responsibility. So again, we can see a really different approach here in this exhibit. The third one I'm calling A Journey of Discovery, and this is about the latest exhibition at the museum called Connected Planet. So it's a temporary exhibition and that explores the connectivity of life on Earth through land, water and air. And this exhibit, people really liked the range of different topics that it talked about. It wasn't kind of one particular topic. There was loads of different things in there, from space to kelp forests to El Nino to fungi systems and networks to worms. We had a live wormery in there. So there's loads of different things that people really enjoyed exploring, all those different topics that were involved in the exhibit. People also really liked the scenery and the design of the exhibit. So you can see here we've got some kind of netting hanging down, which is kind of replicating that kelp forest. Well, hopefully you think that. But we had like nice drapes, and a lot of the exhibits were kind of behind glass cases with like portholes looking through. So it was very physical to kind of walk through a lot of exploration for people, and people really enjoyed that, and it really presented that sense of interconnectedness of the world. This in turn gave people really positive emotions. So a lot of people said admiration and joy and pride in the natural world. So it's a very different emotional response for visitors. They also felt it was memorable, impactful, but also sociable, which was quite nice, and also stimulating and relevant. So again, a bit of an overlap with the previous two, but it's doing its own thing. We also found that people who said they felt admiration for the exhibition generally rated it more positively and had a really strong engagement. And then the outcomes for that was that, again, that really strong sense of enjoyment, maybe a bit less on the understanding and the learning, and that might be because it's covering lots of different topics, but there was a real sense of worthwhile kind of being there and taking their time to go through the exhibition. We also found that visitors who felt admiration, again, were keen to learn more more keen to learn more about the various topics included. So they kind of wanted to have that kind of forward thinking and that doing at the end of it. So yeah, so those are three very different approaches to talking about the climate crisis. And what's really interesting about this evaluation method is that it doesn't necessarily say that one is better than the other. It's essentially saying that how do we build those mechanisms of visitor experience for people? How are they piecing together what we've shown them, how they interpret that, and how they come away from things? So some are focused on understanding and learning, some are focused on enjoyment and wonder and fascination for the earth. So yeah, there's not necessarily any one of them is overall better than the others, but we could say, and the data does allow us to kind of compare and go, oh, Meet the Future is considered more interesting than Connected Planet, but Future in Our Hands is considered more memorable than Meet the Future. So it's kind of those different qualities, and then that allows you to kind of pick out what you really want to get out of your exhibits and out of your exhibitions, and what narratives you want to create for people. And it's very much a case of it is up to you. There's no kind of one way. It's just I'm just kind of showing you how those different approaches come out to different outcomes, depending on what outcomes you want. So yeah, just kind of leaving you with a bit of thought. How would you then use your collections to, how would these approaches work for your audiences? Do you have the research capacity to present a really new and groundbreaking research? Are you creating more memorable and emotional experiences for people? But yeah, I will leave it there, and happy to answer any questions. We have quite a bit of time, so if there are any questions, please.
Thank you, that was so interesting. All of the bits about the details of the exhibition, but also like how you put that information out was really interesting. Thank you. I've got two questions. One is what is the first one is often there was seems to be like a trade-off almost in understanding versus enjoyment. So if you really they enjoyed it a bit more but less understanding, I just wanted to ask what you thought about the two and the relationship.
Yeah, so the question was, what is the trade-off between the understanding and the enjoyment, which there seem to be in the exhibitions? Yeah, I think it's really interesting because obviously talking about the climate crisis can be a really difficult subject for audiences. And so it's kind of like, do we want to really push information and narratives, or do we want them to make sure that they're still having a lovely time at the museum on a Saturday afternoon and things? So yeah, it is a trade-off. And one thing we found when we were developing Connected Planet, which I was involved in, is we kind of made the decision that we felt that people were quite saturated with information, and so we wanted to take that different approach and not necessarily push the information and the narratives in that sense, but allow people to really understand the wonder and the fascination of the natural world and how it all works and everything. And we kind of banked on them bringing that information with them. So a lot of people said in the feedback, they were like, oh, I thought about kelp, and then I thought about plastic pollution, which we didn't mention in the exhibition, but they kind of bring that information with us. So that might be a consideration. But yeah, I think it's hard with the climate crisis to make sure that you're telling the right stories, but do you want to kind of, is it going to be too hard hitting for people? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's large discussions Zoom and lots of visitors. Big discussion.
Yeah.
Depress them about all our
Yeah.
research. So thank you. And then the other one was, I guess, so you were involved in the planning of the exhibition. When you say people enjoyed it, was that the plan? You mentioned that you plan something as a and people experience something as a visitor. Were those ones that you mentioned? Did you plan for people to enjoy it more and on the educational bit? The education.
Yeah, we obviously oh, sorry, the question was in the planning of the exhibition, how did we plan for kind of what those results were? And I guess we obviously planned for it to be educational. There's a lot of research involved in the exhibition, lots of quotes and different researchers talking about their work. But we did kind of go, and that's kind of the usefulness of the framework in thinking about what our goals are with this. So kind of one of the really important things was that experience and that kind of physicality of the exhibition, which is why we had all the curtains that people walked through, and the way they looked at specimens was quite a physical approach. So that was kind of a harder priority, more so, I guess, kind of, yeah, a bit more so than the educational focus. We really wanted to make it an experience for an exhibition. So yeah.
You have people online.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. You mentioned the first two exhibitions, the overwhelming experience was that of guilt. And then the third exhibition was more positive experience. And associated with guilt, there was a desire to change behavior. Do you think guilt alone motivates behavioral change? I'm not so sure guilt alone does. And if the intent was to motivate behavioral change, did you point towards avenues through which people who experience this guilt could potentially?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really interesting. The question was, how does guilt work as a kind of agent for changing behaviour? And it was really interesting for Meet the Future, where the focus, I wasn't involved in the planning, but I don't think the focus of the exhibition was to make people feel guilty. Like in the content that we talked about, it wasn't about animal ethics and things, it was more about information. And I think we found that a lot of people brought that guilt with them. So it was like that reflection created the guilt, rather than us going, you must feel guilty if you do this or whatever. So yeah, so that was a really interesting point. But then I've also done evaluations where that admiration acts as a vehicle for change, and we found it in different ways. I think what we found with Meet the Future is that, and there was a quote I put in the presentation about people feeling the information we gave them, even though if they felt guilty, they felt armed with all that data and information that they could then use to empower them to change. So I think that was a really important part. We tried to be very solutions focused in the exhibition, so that guilt was kind of armoured well and used as a vehicle for change.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was brilliant.